Of all the cases which my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes investigated in the course of his long and distinguished career, none presented a more singular and unnerving set of circumstances than that of the unfortunate journalist Isadora Persano. The matter was brought to a close long ago, and the principal actors have since passed from this world, yet the memory of it remains with me as a chilling testament to the strange evils which can lurk in the hidden corners of our vast metropolis. Holmes himself would often refer to it in his more whimsical moments, classifying it in his great index under P for Persano and W for the worm that was, for a time, utterly unknown to science. The affair began, as so many did, on a drab and dreary November afternoon. A thick yellow fog, the colour of pea soup, had descended upon London, muffling the sounds of the city and creeping with ghostly fingers through every crack and crevice of our rooms at 221B Baker Street. I had been attempting to read a medical journal by the light of the gas lamp, but the oppressive gloom had seeped into my very spirits, and I found my mind wandering from the dense text. Holmes, however, was impervious to such atmospheric influences. He sat hunched over his chemical bench, a long-stemmed pipe clenched between his teeth, surrounded by a labyrinth of beakers, retorts, and Bunsen burners. A particularly noxious odour, which I had come to associate with his more esoteric experiments, filled the air. For the better part of an hour, the only sounds were the gentle bubbling of his apparatus and the occasional scratch of my turning page. "Watson," he said suddenly, without turning round, "you are finding your treatise on the phalanges of the inner ear to be unutterably tedious. Your mind is not upon it. You have sighed 3 times in the last 5 minutes, and have tapped your foot with an impatience that suggests you would rather be lancing a boil than absorbing more knowledge." "My dear Holmes," I replied, startled, "your observations are, as ever, unerringly accurate. This fog would dampen the spirits of a saint. But how could you possibly know the subject of my reading?" "The journal is propped before you," he said, gesturing with his pipe stem over his shoulder. "It is the British Medical Quarterly. The November issue has but 3 articles of a length sufficient to occupy an entire afternoon. The first, on the subject of Asiatic cholera, you read last week, for I observed you making notes in the margin. The second, on the nervous system of the cephalopod, would hold no interest for a practical man such as yourself. Ergo, you are attempting to digest Dr. Stapleton's monograph on the ossicles of the tympanum. The case, you see, is elementary." He chuckled to himself and turned back to his malodorous concoction. Before I could frame a reply to this fresh example of his peculiar methods, there came a frantic and percussive knocking at our front door, followed by the hurried footsteps of our landlady, Mrs. Hudson, upon the stair. The door flew open to admit a man whose face I knew well. It was Inspector Gregson of Scotland Yard, his features flushed and his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was a capable officer, if a trifle unimaginative, and to see him in such a state of agitation was a most unusual occurrence. "Mr. Holmes!" he cried, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket to mop his brow. "Thank heaven you are in. We have a case for you. A queer business, the queerest I have seen in 20 years on the force." Holmes turned slowly on his stool, his keen grey eyes lighting up with interest. The ennui that had settled upon him for the past few days vanished as if by magic. "Pray be seated, Inspector," he said, gesturing towards the basket chair. Compose yourself and give us the facts. The more outre and inexplicable the details, the better I shall be pleased. What is it? A murder? A robbery? I wish it were so simple, Gregson lamented, sinking into the chair. It is the affair of Mr. Isadora Persano. Holmes raised his eyebrows. The journalist? The man whose vitriolic pen has toppled 2 government ministers and exposed the inner workings of half the criminal syndicates in London. A man famous for his duelling as much as for his prose. What of him? He has been found, said Gregson, lowering his voice to a confidential whisper, in a state of what the doctors are calling complete and utter insanity. Insanity? I exclaimed. But I saw him at the Diogenes Club only last week. He was the very picture of intellectual vigour. Be that as it may, Doctor, the inspector continued, he was discovered less than 2 hours ago by his housekeeper, locked in his study. She heard him crying out, not words, you understand, but terrible animalistic sounds. When the door was forced, they found him cowering in a corner, his eyes wide with a terror the likes of which I have never seen. He was gibbering, pointing at shadows, and seemed unable to recognize anyone. Holmes leaned forward, his face a mask of intense concentration. And the cause? Was there any sign of a struggle? Any injury? Not a scratch upon him, nor a stick of furniture out of place, said Gregson. The room was locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry. It is as if his mind simply shattered. But there is one thing more, one very strange thing. He paused for dramatic effect, drawing a small tin matchbox from his waistcoat pocket and placing it carefully upon the table between us. He was clutching this, he said, held it in his hand with a grip of iron. We had to pry it from his fingers. The doctors thought it was empty, but I insisted on examining it myself. With a sense of rising anticipation, Holmes reached for the box. He slid it open with a delicate touch. Nestled upon the white cotton wool within was something so bizarre and repellent that I let out an involuntary gasp. It was a worm, or what appeared to be one. Scarcely an inch in length, it was of a pallid, fleshy white colour, and it seemed to pulsate with a slow, rhythmic light of its own, a faint and sickly luminescence that was clearly visible in the gloom of the room. It had no discernible features, no head, no tail, no eyes, only a smooth, segmented body that writhed sluggishly upon its bed of cotton. "Good heavens, Holmes!" I cried. "What on earth is that creature?" Holmes did not answer. He had snatched up his most powerful magnifying lens and was examining the thing with an avidity that I had seen in him only when he was confronted with a problem of the most baffling and unusual nature. "Singular?" he murmured, his voice a low hum of excitement. "Exceedingly singular. Gregson, you say Persano was a duellist?" "Notorious for it, sir, though he always fought for what he considered a just cause. He crippled the Comte de la Fère in Paris last year over an insult to a lady's honour." "And his journalism? What was his current crusade?" "He was in the midst of a series of articles for the Pall Mall Gazette exposing the business practices of Sir Roderick Fane, the shipping magnate. Accused him of all sorts of villainy in his South American trade routes." Holmes placed the lens down and looked from the worm to the inspector, his eyes glittering. "This is no common case of sudden mania, Gregson," he said. "There are deep waters here. Watson and I will accompany you to Mr. Persano's residence at once. As for this specimen," he added, carefully closing the matchbox, "it shall not leave my sight. I have a distinct feeling that this small, unlovely creature is the true key to this entire extraordinary affair. Mr. Isadora Persano resided in a handsome, if somewhat austere house in Bloomsbury. A small crowd of curious onlookers had gathered on the pavement, held back by a stoic police constable. Inspector Gregson led us through, and we were met in the hall by a distraught, grey-haired woman who I took to be the housekeeper. The study into which we were shown was a large, book-lined room, reflecting the intellectual pursuits of its owner. A great mahogany desk stood in the centre, littered with papers, proofs, and correspondence. A fire had died down to sullen embers in the grate, and the air was cold and still. The room was exactly as Gregson had described it, orderly, precise, and showing no sign of any violent disturbance. While the inspector recounted the grim discovery to me in hushed tones, Holmes was already at work. To the casual observer, he might have seemed to be moving about the room at random, but I, who was familiar with his methods, knew that every glance, every movement, was part of a systematic and exhaustive search. He began by examining the lock on the inside of the door, his lens so close that his nose almost touched the brass. From there he moved to the windows, testing the latches and peering out at the small walled garden behind the house. He then crawled upon his hands and knees, his hawk-like face sweeping from side to side across the Persian rug. He was like a magnificent hound upon a scent, and I knew that some minute detail, invisible to all others, would not escape his notice. "The police have searched the room, of course?" he asked, without looking up. "Thoroughly, Mr. Holmes," said Gregson with a hint of pride. "My best men have been over it. There is nothing to be found." "I have no doubt of their competence, Inspector," Holmes replied dryly, "but it is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. I am in search of data." He paused near the corner where the unfortunate journalist had been found, sniffing the air like a connoisseur of fine wines. "There is a peculiar odour in this room, Watson," he remarked. "Faint, but distinct. Is it familiar to you?" I stepped forward and inhaled deeply. There was, beneath the musty smell of old paper and leather, a subtle, cloying sweetness. It was an aroma that was both floral and chemical, entirely alien to me. "I cannot place it," I confessed. "Nor I," said Holmes, "which makes it all the more significant." He continued his circuit of the room and came to a halt before a large bookshelf. His eyes scanned the leather-bound spines, finally coming to rest upon one particular volume. With a delicate touch, he slid it from the shelf. "The Entomology of the Amazon Basin," by Dr. Julian Almeida, published 1885, he read aloud, flipping through the pages. "It seems our friend Persano had developed a recent interest in exotic insects. And see here, the book is open to a chapter on larval organisms." He showed me the page. It was filled with detailed scientific drawings of various grubs and caterpillars, but none bore any resemblance to the creature in the matchbox. What was notable, however, was a small damp patch upon the page, as if a single drop of water had fallen there and been hastily blotted. Holmes touched it with his fingertip, then brought the finger to his nose. "The same sweet scent," he murmured, "curiouser and curiouser." His attention then shifted to the desk. He sorted through the mass of papers with a swift, practiced hand, his eyes darting over invoices, letters, and the galley proofs of an article. "Ah!" he said suddenly, picking up a single sheet of notepaper. "What have we here?" The paper contained a short, scribbled message. "The silent watcher sees all. The worm turns for thee." It was written in a spidery, agitated hand. "Is that Persano's writing?" Holmes asked Gregson. The inspector squinted at the note. "It appears to be, sir, but I've never seen it so frantic." "A threat, perhaps," I suggested. "One that preyed upon his mind and drove him to this state." "It is a possibility, Watson," Holmes conceded, carefully placing the note in his pocketbook. "But the phrasing is most peculiar. The silent watcher. The worm turns. It smacks more of melodrama than of a genuine threat from the criminal classes." He completed his survey of the room by examining the contents of the wastepaper basket, from which he extracted a small crumpled ball of paper. He smoothed it out to reveal a telegram. The message was brief. "Almeida docks tonight. SS Gloria. Beware." "Almeida," Holmes mused, his brow furrowed in thought. "The name seems to resonate, Dr. Julian Almeida, the author of our book, and he is connected with the docks and a ship named the Gloria. Inspector, I should be most grateful if you could discover all you can about this vessel. From which port does she hail, and what is her cargo?" "At once, Mr. Holmes," Gregson replied, eager to be of service. "And now, Watson," Holmes said, clapping me on the shoulder, "our work here is done. We must return to Baker Street, where I intend to spend the evening in the company of my microscope and this most singular of worms. I have a theory taking shape, my dear fellow, so fantastic, so utterly improbable, that I hesitate to even voice it. But if I am right, we are on the trail of a villain whose methods are as unique as they are diabolical." Back in our Baker Street lodgings, the fog had thickened to the consistency of a tangible blanket, pressing against the window panes and isolating us from the world outside. For me, the gloom was now imbued with a sense of profound unease, but for Holmes it was the perfect backdrop for deep concentration. He had set up his powerful brass microscope on a small table drawn close to the lamp, its polished lenses gleaming in the gaslight. With the delicate precision of a surgeon, he used a pair of fine tweezers to transfer the strange, phosphorescent worm from its matchbox to a glass slide. "Come, Watson, and observe," he said, his voice low with suppressed excitement. "Your medical eye may see something that I miss." I leaned over his shoulder and peered into the eyepiece. Magnified 100-fold, the creature was a truly monstrous spectacle. Its pale, segmented body was revealed to be a complex structure of translucent tissues, through which I could perceive the slow, rhythmic pulsing of rudimentary internal organs. But what was most astonishing was its skin. It was not smooth as it had appeared to the naked eye, but was covered in a million microscopic pores, from which the faint, otherworldly light seemed to emanate. As it writhed upon the slide, this light would wax and wane, a silent, hypnotic rhythm. "Incredible," I breathed. "I have never seen such a cellular structure. It seems almost fungal in its composition, yet it is clearly an animal organism. There is nothing like it in any textbook of zoology I have ever studied." "Precisely," said Holmes, his satisfaction evident. "It is, as the case file will one day read, a worm unknown to science. But what is its function? What is its purpose?" He began a series of experiments. He introduced a drop of water to the slide, at which the creature became agitated, its luminescence brightening. A drop of alcohol, however, caused it to recoil and dim. He then took a tiny vial from his chemical rack and, using a pipette, placed a single drop of a clear, viscous liquid near the worm. "This is a potent alkaloid of my own distillation, Watson, derived from a rare South American vine. Let us observe its effect." The moment the liquid touched the creature, the reaction was instantaneous and dramatic. The worm convulsed violently, and its entire body flared with a brilliant emerald-green light, so intense that I was forced to look away. Simultaneously, a wave of that same sweet, cloying odour we had detected in Persano's study washed over us, far stronger and more sickening than before. Just as quickly, the light died, and the creature lay still upon the slide, its strange inner fire extinguished. It was dead. Holmes leaned back, his long fingers steepled before him. His face was grim. "So," he said softly, "it is as I suspected. The light, the scent, and the madness are all connected. This is no mere biological curiosity, Watson. This is a weapon." "A weapon?" I echoed, aghast. "But how? It does not bite. It has no sting." "It does not need one," Holmes explained, his eyes fixed upon the dead thing on the slide. "Its defense mechanism is far more subtle and far more terrible. Did you not feel a momentary wave of dizziness when the scent was released?" I had to admit that I had. A brief, swimming sensation had passed through my head. "My mind is a fortress, Watson, trained to resist such things," Holmes continued. "But imagine the effect of that scent, that toxin, on a man of a more nervous or artistic temperament. Imagine it released not in a large, airy room, but in close proximity, perhaps held in the palm of a hand. The pores on its skin secrete a neurotoxin of immense power. It is not a poison that kills the body, but one that attacks the mind. A potent hallucinogen that preys upon the victim's deepest fears and anxieties, plunging them into a waking nightmare from which there is no escape. Isadora Persano was not driven mad by a threat or by fear. He was poisoned by a worm. The sheer audacity and horror of the concept left me speechless. It was a method of attack so fiendish and so far beyond the realms of conventional crime that I could scarcely comprehend it. But who could have conceived of such a thing, Holmes, and for what purpose? "Our quarry is a man of two parts," said Holmes, rising from his stool and beginning to pace the room. "He must be a man of science, for he has cultivated this creature. And he must be a man of immense cruelty, for he has deployed it. The name that connects these threads is Almeida, Dr. Julian Almeida, the naturalist, the man whose book lay upon Persano's shelf, the man who, according to the telegram, was to arrive at the docks tonight." Just as he spoke, there was a heavy tread on the stair, and Inspector Gregson, red-faced and triumphant, burst back into our rooms. "I have the information, Mr. Holmes," he announced. "The SS Gloria is a tramp steamer registered to the Fane shipping line. She arrived 2 hours ago from Manaus, in the heart of Brazil. Her official cargo is listed as rubber and hardwood timber." "And her unofficial cargo?" Holmes pressed. "My sources at the docks speak of hushed-up dealings," Gregson said, lowering his voice. "Of Sir Roderick Fane using his ships to smuggle artifacts, rare animals, and sometimes even men. He is a ruthless character for all his fine London reputation." Holmes brought his hands together with a sharp crack. "The picture is almost complete. Persano, the crusading journalist, was on the verge of exposing Sir Roderick Fane's nefarious activities in the Amazon. Fane, in order to silence him, employs a disgraced but brilliant biologist, Dr. Almeida, who has been conducting his monstrous experiments in the depths of the jungle. Almeida brings his living poison to London and unleashes it upon the unsuspecting journalist. It is he who is the silent watcher, and it is his venomous worm that turns for his victim. "Good Lord," Gregson whispered, his face pale. "It's diabolical." "It is genius in its own twisted way," Holmes corrected him. But now we must act. Almeida is in London. He may believe his work is done, but a man of his caution will want to be certain. He may even attempt to retrieve his specimen. "Watson, your service revolver. Gregson, I shall require 2 of your stoutest men. We are going to pay a visit to Bloomsbury, and we shall lie in wait. For I have a fancy that the silent watcher may be drawn back to the scene of his crime." Our vigil in Isadora Persano's study was one of the most nerve-wracking I have ever endured. We extinguished all the lamps, leaving the room lit only by the faint ghostly glow of a London gas lamp filtering through the grimy window. Gregson and his 2 burly constables concealed themselves in the deep shadows of an alcove, while Holmes and I took up positions on either side of the cold fireplace. The silence within the house was absolute, a profound and heavy quiet that was broken only by the distant mournful hoot of a steam tug on the river. Hours crawled by. The chill of the room seeped into my bones, and my hand, resting on the cold steel of the Webley in my pocket, grew numb. I began to doubt Holmes's reasoning. It seemed improbable that the perpetrator, having succeeded so completely, would risk returning. Holmes, however, showed no such uncertainty. He sat motionless in his armchair, a dark silhouette against the gloom, the very embodiment of patience and predatory readiness. I could not see his face, but I knew that his senses would be stretched to their utmost limit, listening for the faintest sound, the slightest indication of an approaching presence. It was shortly after 2 in the morning when our patience was rewarded. I heard it first, a faint scraping sound from the rear of the house, coming from the direction of the small walled garden. It was the sound of a key turning cautiously in a lock. Holmes's hand shot out and gripped my arm, a silent command for absolute stillness. We heard a door creak open, then the soft tread of footsteps in the hallway. They were slow, deliberate footsteps, the steps of a man who is moving with infinite caution in a dark and unfamiliar space. The handle of the study door began to turn, slowly, silently. A thin sliver of dim light from the hall appeared as the door swung inwards. A figure slipped into the room, a man of medium height, gaunt and wiry, dressed in dark travelling clothes. In one hand he carried a small shielded lantern, which cast a narrow beam of light upon the floor before him. He closed the door behind him with the same unnerving silence, and stood for a moment, listening. Satisfied that the house was quiet, he moved towards the desk, his lantern beam dancing over the scattered papers. He was clearly searching for something. He muttered to himself in a low, frustrated hiss, and I saw him run a hand through his dark, dishevelled hair. This, I knew, must be Dr. Julian Almeida, the man who had perverted the secrets of nature to serve his own black purposes. His face, caught for a moment in the lamplight, was that of a scholar, with a high forehead and thin, ascetic lips, but his eyes, deep-set and burning with a fanatical intensity, were those of a madman. He seemed not to find what he was looking for on the desk, and turned his attention to the corner of the room where Persano had been found. He swept the beam of his lantern across the floor, and it was then that Holmes chose to act. "I should not trouble yourself, Doctor," came Holmes's voice, calm and conversational from the darkness. "If it is a small phosphorescent worm you're seeking, I have it in safekeeping at my lodgings in Baker Street." The effect of this sudden utterance was electric. Almeida let out a strangled cry of shock and spun around, dropping his lantern, which clattered to the floor and went out, plunging the room into near-total darkness. I heard a frantic scrabbling sound, followed by the sharp metallic click of a pistol being cocked. "Stay where you are!" Almeida shrieked, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "I am armed. I will shoot." "I have no doubt that you would," Holmes's voice replied, now from a different part of the room. "But you are facing 3 pistols, Doctor, and the odds are not in your favor. Gregson, if you would be so good." At this signal, the inspector and his men erupted from their hiding place. There was a brief, desperate struggle, a flurry of curses and the thud of bodies colliding, and then the sharp snap of handcuffs closing around wrists. A moment later, Gregson struck a match, and its flare revealed our captive, pinned to the floor by the 2 constables, his face a mask of impotent fury, his pistol lying harmlessly a few feet away. "Dr. Julian Almeida, I presume?" said Holmes, stepping forward into the light. He picked up the doctor's discarded firearm and examined it. A Belgian Derringer, a nasty little weapon. "You have had a busy night, Doctor. First the docks, and now a little light housebreaking. It is a pity your employer, Sir Roderick Fane, could not be here to witness your capture." Almeida's head snapped up, his eyes widening in disbelief. How could you possibly know?" "I know a great deal," Holmes said sternly. "I know of your biological research in the Amazon. I know of the unique organism you cultivated there. I know that you were hired to silence Isadora Persano before he could publish his final damning article on Sir Roderick's slave labour practices. And I know the precise method by which you drove him into a state of living hell." The scientist stared at Holmes, his breathing ragged. For a moment it seemed he would deny everything, but then, under the unwavering gaze of my friend, his composure shattered. A low, wretched sob escaped his lips. "He deserved it," Almeida whispered, his voice cracking. "He was going to ruin everything, years of my work. The Fane shipping line funded my research, gave me the freedom that the petty-minded fools at the university denied me. Persano, with his high-minded morals and his infernal pen, was a threat to all of it. He had to be stopped. And so you chose a method of attack as cowardly as it was cruel," Holmes finished, his voice like chipped ice. "You have much to answer for, Doctor, not only for the destruction of a great mind, but for the gross misuse of your own." He turned to Gregson. "Inspector, you have your man. I should advise you to have Sir Roderick Fane's home and offices watched. When he learns of this night's work, I suspect he will make an attempt to flee the country." As the constables hauled the broken and whimpering scientist to his feet and led him from the room, I let out a long breath I had not been aware of holding. The tension in the air had broken, leaving behind only the cold, musty silence of the study. "Another singular case brought to a successful conclusion, Holmes," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Your reasoning was magnificent." "It was a 3-pipe problem, Watson," he replied, a faint smile playing on his lips. "No more, no less. But come, the dawn will be breaking soon. Let us return to Baker Street. I feel the need for a celebratory violin concerto and Mrs. Hudson's excellent coffee. There are still one or two loose threads which I must explain to you. Back in the familiar, cluttered comfort of our sitting room, with a cheerful fire blazing in the grate and the first grey light of dawn creeping over the London rooftops, Holmes unravelled the final skeins of the case for my benefit. The key, as I noted from the very beginning, was the worm, he began, lighting his first pipe of the morning. Its unnatural appearance suggested that we were dealing with no ordinary criminal. This was the work of an intellect, albeit a warped and malevolent one. When I discovered Almeida's book on Amazonian entomology in Persano's study, the first connection was forged. The telegram confirmed that Almeida was not merely a subject of Persano's reading, but a person of immediate and dangerous interest. "And the note you found?" I asked. The silent watcher sees all. "A piece of pure theatrical villainy," Holmes chuckled. Almeida, a man of immense ego, could not resist taunting his victim. After gaining entry to the house, likely through the garden door, for which a man in Sir Roderick's employ could easily obtain a key, he placed the matchbox containing the worm on the desk. He then penned that melodramatic note to ensure Persano's attention would be drawn to it. The rest was inevitable. Persano, a man of insatiable curiosity, would open the box. The warmth of his hand would cause the agitated creature to secrete its toxin. He would inhale the sweet-scented poison, and his mind would collapse under the hallucinatory assault. "It is a terrifying thought," I said with a shudder. Indeed, the toxin is clearly designed to amplify the subconscious fears of the victim. For a man like Persano, a public crusader who lived his life making powerful enemies, the fear of a hidden silent observer, a secret enemy, would have been a potent one. Almeida's note was designed to plant that very seed in his mind just before the poison took effect. It was a masterstroke of psychological cruelty. "And what will become of them all, Holmes? Almeida and Fane?" "Almeida, I fear, is destined for Broadmoor, or perhaps the gallows, though his lawyers will doubtless plead insanity, a grim irony given his crime. As for Sir Roderick Fane, Gregson sent a telegram before we left Bloomsbury. The shipping magnate was apprehended at Dover, attempting to board a steamer for Calais with a satchel full of negotiable bonds. His empire will crumble, and the full extent of his villainy will be laid bare for all to see, a fitting, if posthumous, triumph for Isadora Persano's final investigation. And Persano himself? Is there any hope for his recovery?" Holmes's expression softened, and a shadow of sadness passed across his features. "That, my dear Watson, is the great tragedy of this affair. I have been in communication with his physicians. The toxin has done its work too well. They have managed to calm him, but the damage to his mind appears to be profound, and they fear permanent. He may live for many years, but the brilliant intellect, the fiery spirit that once inhabited his body, is gone forever. He is the true victim of the worm, unknown to science." He fell silent for a long while, puffing thoughtfully on his pipe and staring into the dancing flames of the fire. The case was closed, the culprits brought to justice, but the human cost weighed heavily in the air. Finally he stood and picked up his violin from its case. "It is a grim world at times, Watson," he said softly, "and the products of a brilliant mind can be used for the greatest of goods or the most terrible of evils. It is our lot to stand against the latter." He tucked the instrument under his chin, and soon the melancholy searching notes of a Paganini caprice filled the room, a strange and beautiful lament for the light that had been so coolly extinguished. As I sat and listened, I reflected that while the world was indeed full of darkness, it was a brighter and safer place for containing the unique and extraordinary genius of my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes.